First a disappearance, then a possible death, and now a diplomatic disaster. A prominent journalist has been missing for almost a week after entering the Saudi Arabian consulate in Istanbul. Was he killed by his own government? I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmaker is Jamal Khashoggi. He was once an advisor to the Saudi royal family, but in recent years, Jamal Khashoggi became one of their most vocal critics, especially of the policies of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Khashoggi said that under his rule, the kingdom could never be a democracy, and it's this type of criticism that some believe may have led to his murder. Last week, Khashoggi entered the Saudi Arabian consulate in Istanbul, and he hasn't been seen since. Turkish authorities have suggested he could have been killed and dismembered, but Riyadh categorically denies that. Now calls have been made for an international inquiry. But what will it uncover? For more, here's Haider Abbasi.
These protesters are demanding answers. They want to know what happened to their friend, Jamal Khashoggi. Some fear that he could now be dead.
They kidnapped him, and now there is news that he's been killed. If this news is true, that is an awful crime that doesn't happen in all humanity history.
Turkish investigators have suggested the Saudi journalist was murdered inside the consulate and his body later removed, but they haven't provided any evidence to support this. Saudi Arabia denies the allegation. Khashoggi went to the mission last Tuesday to finalize his divorce, but then he vanished. Since the day he disappeared, the Saudi consulate has denied any knowledge of where Jamal Khashoggi might be. Consulate officials insist he left shortly after completing his paperwork, but his fiancée, who was waiting outside, says he never came back again. Turkish police asked to review cameras outside the consulate, but the staff say the cameras weren't recording. On Saturday, the mission allowed journalists from the Reuters news agency inside in an attempt to show that Khashoggi wasn't there.
I would like to confirm that the citizen Jamal is not at the consulate nor in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and the consulate and the embassy are working to search for him, and we are worried about his case.
Turkish police say 15 Saudi nationals flew into Istanbul on the same day Khashoggi disappeared. They visited the consulate and left later that day. There are no details on who these officials were. Khashoggi's been an outspoken critic of the Saudi government, and especially Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He's opposed the Saudi blockade of Qatar, the war on Yemen, and the arrest of activists inside the kingdom. But Khashoggi's not just any critic. He used to be close to the Saudi royal family and served as an advisor to the government. Khashoggi doesn't describe himself as a dissident, but rather as someone urging reform in Saudi Arabia. After the arrest of several of his friends last year, his column in the Al Hayat newspaper was cancelled and he was told to stop tweeting. He then left Saudi Arabia and moved to the United States, where he began writing a column for the Washington Post. Relations between Turkey and Saudi Arabia are already strained. Ankara supports Qatar, which has been blockaded by Saudi Arabia since last year. Riyadh is also upset that Turkey has improved relations with Iran. But the potential murder of a Saudi national on Turkish soil could trigger a diplomatic crisis. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says he's monitoring the case.
Hala iyi niyetli. İnşallah diyorum o arzu etmediğimiz bir durumla karşı karşıya kalmayız. Tabii nişanlısının bu süreç içerisindeki beklentisi o da ayrı bir konu.
But if evidence is found that Khashoggi was murdered, what action will Turkey's government take? And should Saudi dissidents living abroad be concerned for their safety? Haider Abbasi, The Newsmakers, Istanbul.
Well, to try to make sense of the events surrounding Khashoggi's disappearance, we're joined now by Fatih Öke. He's the executive director of the Turkish Arab Media Association, which has been leading protests outside the Saudi consulate. In London, we have Dawood Abdallah. He's the director of Middle East Monitor. And completing our panel in Washington, D.C. is Ali Al-Ahmed. He's the director of the Institute of Gulf Affairs. Now, we reached out to several Saudi guests, most of whom declined. The one who we did have booked in pulled out moments before this recording. I'm tremendously irritated by that because we would have at least had the opportunity to hear from someone defending the Saudi perspective, the Saudi government's perspective. We don't have that right now. So, gentlemen, I'm looking forward to this discussion. So many questions, so much mystery surrounding this. Let me ask you, Fatih, to begin with, Jamal Khashoggi, did they kill him inside the embassy?
Now, I have two questions, two answers for this, but let me thank you in the beginning. Thank you very much to have us in here as Turkish Arabic Media Network. I have to answer. As friend of Jamal, I will say no, they didn't kill him. Because no one can do that kind of barbaric application to a human, even in my dream. No one can think about it. But as a former journalist, I will say most probably they killed him. Because there's no other explanation. We are 100% sure he didn't came out.
From the Turkish authorities, the police and others, are they quite certain that this is what was done?
They are very certain. And we are spending our last 5 days, we were here, and we find enough time to observe the area. And as far as we understand, there is no place to hide a body in a trunk and going out. There's no garage. Actually, there's a garage door, but they are not using it. And there's no place to hide him in a black car or something. And as the surveillance camera, there's no box came out. A human body can fit around 190 centimeter tall. He was a tall guy. Now we find a conclusion that they killed him and they bring him out with an outrageous and barbaric way. We are not sure how they do this. Actually, as a friend of him, I'm not sure he's dead or not because I didn't see him again. It's a very sad thing for us. It's very sad for me personally, also for his fiancée, Hatice.
Of course.
We all shocked. Hatice is she waits him 5 hours in the outside without anybody. We came to her after 5 hours. She was waiting there. She was waiting. She's looking at the door. Still, it's shocking.
Dawood Abdullah, another friend of Jamal's, help me understand whether he feared for his life, whether he thought that he might be in trouble with the Saudi government to the extent that he might actually lose his life.
Well, he did have some concerns about, the visit, that particular visit to the consulate. And that was demonstrated in the fact that he gave his fiancée the telephone and told her, if I don't return after 3 hours or a certain period, then, you should call the authorities and raise an alert. So there was concern on his behalf as to whether or not, it would be a cordial visit and to the embassy.
Yeah. Dawood, do you fear the worst?
I think after 1 week, tomorrow would be 1 week, and given the length of time, it appears, that something sinister has taken place. The fact, however, is that we don't have any evidence to substantiate or claim that, he's dead, unless, people have some evidence. But the thing is, you see, my analysis of it is that when he went in there, they may have attempted to kidnap him and extradite him to Saudi Arabia. and he would have resisted. In the course of doing this, and given the fact that there were so many other people around who came in very conveniently to the meeting, they may have tried to subdue him, and in the process of doing that, exerted undue physical pressure on him, which may have led to his death, either by heart attack or whatever.
Right.
We don't know.
I mean, that could be plausible. We just don't know. And this is the thing. We do this program stating very clearly, despite what some authorities have said to journalists and so forth, have said to Fatih and others, we don't know. Some Turkish authorities have said off the record, some have said on the condition of anonymity that he's dead. They dismembered him. There was a 15-man crack team, hit squad that was sent here. We just don't know for sure, but things do seem to be really grave and really ominous. Ali Al-Ahmed, I was looking forward to you and Salman Al-Ansari locking horns, if you like, over this issue. Salman Al-Ansari was our guest who was booked from the Saudi American Public Relations Affairs Committee, and he pulled out at the last minute. Be that as it may, it's unfortunate. Let me give you what Mohammed bin Salman said, the Crown Prince. He said, my understanding is he, Khashoggi, entered and he got out after a few minutes or 1 hour. I'm not sure. We are ready to welcome the Turkish government to go and search our premises. The premises are sovereign territory, but we will allow them to enter and search and do whatever they want to do. We have nothing to hide. Ali, are you willing to give him the benefit of the doubt and to believe him at all?
I mean, you cannot really believe a politician in these circumstances. You have to take everything they say with a grain of salt. Having said that, it is not beyond the Saudi government to do such a thing. They have done it before. They have kidnapped and killed, dissidents and even loyalists who, turned against them. So I would believe what the Turkish government is indicating, because they have the best information, and they know if there was 2 planes that came. And I hope, and I call on the Turkish government. I have been to Turkey before. I visited, and I know what they do. When you come in, you have a visa. There are photos and so on. And there are planes that I hope their numbers would be registered or made public, so people could know what time they land and what time they left and where did they go. So that is important for us to know. And I can tell you, I think he possibly, most likely, has been killed. I hope not, to be honest, but regardless of what he thought of us and the relationship, but it's a very sad and
Right.
very it's a horrible crime against anyone who said something or turned even against his longtime patrons. It's not a nice thing to do to anyone.
It's interesting that you say this, right? Long-time patrons, because for a long time he was a staunch defender of the system, not necessarily certain individuals and so forth, but he was hardly the type of person who was calling for revolution. Ali, right? Yes, over the years he criticized more and more and more. However, someone like you, for example, I've spoken to you many times on this program and other programs, you say far harsher things about the Saudi monarchy, about the king and the princes and so forth, than someone like Jamal Khashoggi had ever said. So if it's true, what does it say to you that someone who is a critic, as mild, if you like, I hate that term, but as mild as Jamal Khashoggi, if someone like him could be killed in the consulate, what does that say for everybody else, especially Saudis, who criticize their government?
I think he's in a greater danger. I tell you why. Because, it is in my blood, it's in my genetic that, we criticize the ruling family. My uncle, who's dead now, was in jail in 1969. So we have a long history in our family, in our immediate family and expanded family, of opposing the government. He, however, was a loyalist, and he continued to be in some way, because last September he on TV said he has an allegiance to the king, but he turned against the person in charge, and he was still having conversations and contacts to other members in the ruling family who are marginalized. To the Saudi government, it's important to stop this, what I call deluge of defection. So it is a message not to us, long time or lifelong dissidents, but to loyalists who turn against the regime, not in the system. So it's important for the Mohammed bin Salman, who's probably ordered this hit, to send a message to his followers and loyalists that no one should think about defecting. No one should emulate what Jamal Khashoggi did, because they will end up like this. And I think that was calculated. They knew it, because I knew from he was worried. He told people he was worried. But at the same time, I think there was space for him to come back. He could have had been called by the king, like he used to be called over the years, and told, come back, you're safe, and so on. And I think he would have accepted it. But it was an opportunity to send a message to the followers of Mohammed bin Salman that no one should double cross us, because we will deal with them in this harsh manner. And that was all calculated to send that message,
right,
which is a strong message.
And I'm certain that all of us here in this conversation are hoping that he shows up tomorrow and he says, listen, I'm alive, right?
I hope
and again,
so.
Yeah, and again, we all
I hope so, despite our differences.
Certainly. And I appreciate that, Ali. If it's true, Fatih, this is Saddam-level thuggery, right, in terms of dealing with dissent. What would justice mean for you and all Jamal's other friends and anyone who cares about rule of law and the ability to openly criticize the things that you don't like about your government?
We are, as friends of him, firstly we will ask an exception from the Saudi side. They should accept their story, their crime. First, we have to know they did this. No one should left us alone in this structure. But as legal structure, we don't know yet what shall we do. But we are very certain that it's an attack to whole free world, whole free journalists in the world. And no one should dare that kind of thing again in the future. We want to, if Saudi did this, we want to make them alone in the international era. And maybe America should pull their support on the MBS government. They should be alone in the international area. But as a Muslim, as a man who lives in Jeddah for 7 years, my son born in Jeddah, I'm very sad for Saudi-Turkish relation also. Because Saudi Arabia is a very precious country. Its soil is very precious, holy for us. They have Mecca and Medina. If we cut our relations with them, how those tens of thousands of people will go to Umrah, will go to Hajj in the future? It's a big crisis for Turks. Someone should fix this problem. Someone should end this administration, which is threatening all the world.
Dawood Abdullah, if this is true, and I have to keep on asking that and saying that, if this is true, has Mohammed bin Salman crossed a line that is impossible to reverse from? And is it something that the entire international community has to respond to?
I do think so. I think if we look at what happened in the United Kingdom earlier this year, when the Russian intelligence agents poisoned individuals, dissidents from Russia here in the United Kingdom, our government mounted a massive diplomatic campaign, which resulted in the expulsion of diplomats from a number of European countries. And the process of retribution against the Russians have continued. It was not just expulsion, but sanctions were heightened. So I think, the crime that was committed on Turkish territory can be regarded as an international crime in the sense that it violated the sovereign territory of the Turkish people. And there ought to be consequences. No, it can go either to the International Court of Justice to begin with, as well as through, diplomatic pressure, through the various governments, as we saw in the case of the Russian poisonings in the UK. So there must be accountability. I do appreciate the fact that, there's a special relationship between the Turkish people and, the Holy Lands, and the authorities in Turkey today are really in a very difficult position. But they also must let it be known that a line has been crossed. And no one should ever, take the liberty to commit such gross acts of inhumanity and violation of Turkish sovereign territory in the future, whoever he may be, whether it's in, the King of Arabia or any other republic or kingdom across the region.
Ali Al-Ahmed, you live in DC. I know you. I've interviewed you, as I say, over the years. It's sometimes hard, given the special relationship with the United States, for someone like you to convince American congressmen or senators that maybe their relationship with the Saudis is not the healthiest one, or maybe they give Saudi Arabia too much of a free pass. With something like this, would a lot of them be more open to listening to someone like you?
I don't know, to be honest, because I've been doing this since 2001, and it's been a very uphill climb. And the line is that if the Al Saud goes, they will have Osama bin Laden, and that has been basically the American narrative, which is not only limited to the politicians, but also all those think tanks. I call them fake think tanks because they never really address the issue. The real issue, and they avoid talking about the problems in that country. So I think it's not going to change. The attacks of September 11 didn't change it, so I don't think this issue will change it. Knowing that the U.S. government actually went beyond its legal even space to silence people like myself. With supporting the Saudis, and they almost crossed the line. So this is not going to change much. I know it's going to be in the media for a week or two, but it's not going to actually change much, especially under the Trump administration. It did not change it under the Obama, which was supposedly most likely. It will definitely not. And you can see, I think Mr. Dawood is right. With the UK, incident with the Russians and the Americans have not said anything about this really, and this is a NATO member country in Turkey, and this crime happened there, so they should at least make some stronger statements. The UK and the US are the guarantor of the survivability of the Saudi monarchy, and that will not change over one man. And I understand Turkish reservation and cautious step on this, because Turkey has, I would say, greater issues here with the economy and the economic pressure on it from outside. So I really understand and fully the Turkish position, and I feel for them, because it's not easy for Turkey to deal with this with this issue at this time.
Right.
There is no support from the Americans or the British.
Well, there has been no clear-cut evidence presented either way. At the moment, we just have the worst fears of everyone, from those outside of the embassy every day to those watching from afar as well. If this is true, it is almost unfathomable. It's an almost unfathomable act of thuggery, which will undoubtedly possibly have international ramifications. We'll be watching this story very closely. And as I said before, a lot of us hope Jamal Khashoggi shows up tomorrow, the day after, and says, no, actually, I'm alive. But
for the sake of his daughters,
absolutely.
I hope so.
Yes. Okay. We'll revisit this story very, very soon here on the Newsmakers. But for the moment, I have to move on. Fatih Erke, Dawood Abdullah, and Ali Al-Ahmed, I thank you all for joining us. Still to come on the program, more than a week after a devastating earthquake and tsunami, Indonesia's government announces an end to its search for survivors. But could more lives have been saved? And is the state of the world the worst it's ever been? We asked the head of the Red Cross how they're tackling the most pressing humanitarian crises. Just over a week ago, Indonesia was hit with a catastrophic earthquake and tsunami. So far, the death toll stands at almost 2,000, but that number is expected to rise. Relatives of those still missing eagerly await any news. But now the government has announced it will end its search, and those that remain unaccounted for will be presumed dead. Indonesia is no stranger to natural disasters, and now questions are being asked if the country should have been better prepared. For more, here's Natalie Perhernan.
It was a double disaster. A magnitude 7.5 earthquake struck near Palu on the island of Sulawesi in Indonesia. Within minutes, the quake triggered 3 tsunami waves. A tsunami warning had been issued, but communication and power lines were brought down by the quake. There were no sirens to alert people to head for higher ground. A wall of water as high as 6 meters smashed into Palu. Hundreds of people were at the beach for a festival. More than 1,900 people have died. Authorities say a large number in Palu were killed by the tsunami. The question being asked now is, could people at the shoreline have been given more warning to get away?
My family, my cousins, were here selling things during the City Anniversary Festival. There are a lot of victims also who are still missing, even now.
Dewey Prasasti wasn't at the beach. Her first warning about the tsunami was from the shouts of people nearby.
I kept trying to exit the hotel, to get out of the hotel area. A wave came and hit me hard. When I regained consciousness, suddenly I was on the street in front of the hotel. I remember hearing people shouting, "Tsunami! Tsunami!" That's all I can remember.
Indonesia sits along the Pacific's ring of fire. It's the world's most tectonically active region, and it means people are vulnerable to earthquakes and tsunamis. Indonesia does have a tsunami early warning system. It uses measurements from devices like tidal gauges to determine if there's a need to issue an alert. To spread a tsunami alert, authorities use SMS, emails, faxes, websites, and social media. Indonesia does have a more advanced warning system, a network of 22 tsunami-detecting buoys connected to the sea floor. These were introduced after the 2004 tsunami. But the National Disaster Mitigation Agency says those buoys haven't worked since 2012 due to a lack of funding. But even if that system was working, there's a critical nationwide shortage of alarms.
There's a 63% of the population who couldn't hear the tsunami alarms. Because the number of alarms is limited. We only have 56 alarms, and before this we had 200. But in fact, we need 1,000.
Palu doesn't have one of those 56 alarms. There isn't anything that would have stopped the earthquake that caused the tsunami. But could better maintained technology and a better communication system have saved lives? Natalie Perhernan, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Jakarta is Suprayoga Hadi. He is the senior planner of Indonesia's National Development Planning Agency. And in Blacksburg, Virginia, is Robert Weiss. He's an associate professor of natural hazards at Virginia Tech. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Suprayoga Hadi, let me begin with you. Of course, first of all, sympathies and commiserations with your people. It's a horrible tragedy, and you can't mitigate for these sorts of things. It's a natural disaster. However, we ask questions now when we look at this horrendous death toll and we hear that it could go up to 5,000, maybe even 7,000. And we see and hear and read that some of the early warning systems have failed. Let me ask you very bluntly, could the Indonesians have done better in preventing the scale of this disaster?
Talking about the early warning system, actually, Indonesia already been quite seriously investing in early warning system. But again, the area of Indonesia is very huge. Yeah? For instance, like we are talking about the 99,000 kilometers of the coastal line. And we know that the Ring of Fire. So the early warning system, for instance, like for the earthquake, for the tsunami, needs a very, huge investment actually. And, the capacity of the government is quite limited. And I think it's going to be very good for me to share that the demand and the supply is not really, meet each other. Talking about the numbers already been installed. For instance, like the one that we had in Palu in Central Sulawesi, the buoy or the tsunami early warning system never been installed yet actually in that area, because the limitation of our budget, we only had installed along the coastal line of the Sumatra in the western part and the Java in the southern part of Java, and the rest of Indonesia is still lack of the equipment for such a tsunami early warning system. That's why when it was happened, the estimation and also the assumption that there will be a big waves will be coming in is not really well detected at that time.
I mean, I'm going to circle back to you now and look at some of the specifics of early warning system failure. But let me ask Robert Wise, big picture, could the Indonesians have done better? Was there incompetence? Have they failed their people?
That's a good question. I think for this particular event, it was very difficult to provide warning at the right time, because there was only 15 minutes between the earthquake and the wave arriving. And that doesn't give a lot of time to make decisions. That doesn't give a lot of time to evaluate the earthquake. And let me tell you that the earthquake was a relatively small earthquake compared to the waves that arrived in the bay. And there may be another source, a submarine landslide or sub-area landslide, that caused those big waves. And those are impossible to warn with the current technology.
Yeah, and Robert, was it
if I may just say
go ahead. Sorry, finish your point, and then I'll jump in.
What I wanted to say is this is more a public education point rather than a technology point.
Was it a case of bad luck, given that usually we see the earthquake happens offshore, but there aren't many ramifications from the earthquake itself. It just triggers the tsunami that then washes over the islands and the mainland and so forth. Whereas in this case, the earthquake itself caused devastation as well as the tsunami. Was it the perfect storm? Was it really bad luck, Robert?
In a sense, bad luck, but in nature, bad luck doesn't really exist because there's cause and effect. But in this case, a submarine landslide generated the tsunami, or most likely generated the tsunami, that then impacted the Palu Bay. But it was, in this sense, a perfect storm, because we have this sort of funnel, and at the end of the funnel is Palu, and that sort of focused the energy towards that area from the generation area.
Right.
So the perfect storm is probably a good description in this case.
Suprayoga Hadi, when we look at actual funding that has gone to disaster relief and disaster prevention, right? Of course, a lot of us were around in 2004 with that massive tsunami, and I think across the world people decided, listen, we need to be better prepared for this. That was devastating in December 2004. So you say there's a lack of funding. When we look at the examples of funding, when we see in 2008 that buoys were installed with huge funding from the US government, from the German government and Indonesian government as well, when fish began gathering in the electrical fields, fishermen started fishing them. They also started using the copper wiring from the buoys themselves, and these fell into disrepair, and afterwards there was a lack of funding. So is that, I guess, depressing, given that we're looking at an example of not just the government, but the international community saying, we're going to fix this specific thing, but even that doesn't work out? What does that tell us about the entire system?
I think it's quite clear that if you are talking about the early warning system, for instance, talking about the disaster risk reduction, talking about the climate change adaptation, for instance, is more in the preparedness, more in the preventive. Compared to what we had in Aceh, for instance, it's more in the spending in terms of, the recovery, funding at that time. I think talking about those two is quite, different because, Indonesia already been awarded in 2011 that President Yudhoyono at that time was, appreciated by the UN ISDR as the global champion for disaster risk reduction because our commitment, actually, the government commitment to invest in the DRR, disaster risk reduction. But what I've already been talking about this, gap between the demand and the supply. The supply has already been quite, committed, actually, from the government to invest. But in terms of the demand, which is very huge demand, it is not really, meet each other or meet, properly or sufficiently. So that's the way we are trying to see that the investment for the DRR that already been the global commitment for DRR in 2009, 2011, that 1% of the total national budget supposed to be invested in the DRR, for instance. We already, approaching the 1%. But for the case of Indonesia, which is maybe starting from, if not saying from the zero, but maybe talking about just 10% already been, installed compared to the 90% never been installed. This is quite different, problems. But in terms of the recovery budget that you mentioned compared to Aceh, for instance, with the $5 billion already been spent, helped by other countries, international organizations, international NGOs. In Palu, actually, this now is the flash appeal. Now is becoming, our hope, actually, and we've already been, compiled quite a lot of, international attention as well as assistance. So I think in terms of the recovery, the budget is not really the problems.
Right.
But talking about the disaster risk reduction or preparedness is still, the big gap, actually, for the investment, actually.
Understood. Robert, plate tectonics are a fact of nature. The Ring of Fire is a reality. This will happen again. So how can Indonesia prepare to be more robust next time around?
I think that this is not what we call a typical subduction zone event. This was related to subduction processes, but maybe not. It was not really a big earthquake. The processes are clear, but it was not a big earthquake. I think we are over-relying on technical solutions. For example, even if the buoys and everything would have been in place, I think the warning would have been a little too late in this case. I think a lot of money and a lot of effort need to be spent in the future in public education. For example, you live at the coast, you feel the shaking of an earthquake, you may want to move to higher ground immediately because you may not have enough time. So this kind of guideline or rule of thumb need to be applied, and that's nothing that costs a lot of money, but a lot of effort and a lot of people to bring people together and so forth. But that is the first and foremost mechanism to prevent an event, a disaster of this scale again.
Suprayoga Hadi, is that the most sustainable mechanism long term?
And I agree with Professor Wei's observation on this case, because the education is one of the issue, actually, on how we try to maybe educate the people on how dealing with such a disaster-prone area or region where they live. And for instance, like the one that we had in Mentawai in West Sumatra and also in Semeru in Aceh at that time when tsunami hit in 2004, the people there is quite prepared for what they call the local wisdom. They know exactly how to evacuate when the sea level is decreased and then the waves will be coming in. They know exactly how to deal with that kind of issue. But in case of Palu, it's quite different because at that time the people of Palu is gathering, actually, were gathering at the coastal area at the Talise beach, and they're actually preparing for the anniversary of the city of Palu, and many people were there. So that's the thing. I don't know. This is quite unfortunate actually for them to gather in the beach which finally hit by the tsunami.
Right.
So that's the why the casualties in the tsunami even in Palu is quite high. But Rob, Professor Weiss also mentioning very good observation because the tsunami is only part of the victims, all the casualties. More people killed in the subduction or in the what we call the liquefaction in the hilly area because of the location of the epicentrum is quite close actually to the city of Palu. That's why I think we are still calculating or compile the data of the killed people in the two main areas settlements that already been swamped by the liquefaction. So that's the way we are trying to expect it maybe more than like Imran mentioned, maybe approaching the 10,000
Right.
will be
Okay, well, horrible situation for the people of Palu, Sulawesi. And I thank you both for allowing us to dig into this a little bit and try to understand how to be better prepared next time around and to ask if the Indonesians could have done better this time around. But for the moment, I have to move on. Suprayoga Hadi and Robert Weiss, thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Yemen, Syria, Ethiopia, Eritrea, these are just some of the most pressing humanitarian crises facing the world, making the work of the Red Cross more urgent than ever. Earlier at the TRT World Forum in Istanbul, I met the head of the group and asked him whether he feels powerless to stop the root cause of the problem. How bad are things on a humanitarian level? Are we as bad as it's ever been in the modern era?
I think so. This is we are facing an unprecedented number of crises. But what is concerning the most is the number of protracted crises that show the failure of the international community to fix many of them. Look to the crisis in Africa, for example, in the Horn of Africa. Now it seems that there is a new hope, for example, in Eritrea and Ethiopia. But look at Somalia, look at the Lake Chad crisis. So this is something that is a huge reason of concern. Of course, this is without mentioning the Middle East, which is, of course, another chapter of the book.
When people think of a humanitarian crisis in the year 2018, they normally think of Syria. Mm-hmm. And let me ask you, is Syria the biggest and the worst still?
At the moment, it's one of the biggest. But if you look at the number, of course, I could say that Lake Chad is also another big crisis because it's a forgotten one. And in terms of funds, it's a huge reason of concern for the humanitarians in terms of our ability to reach all the areas and to provide services to those in need. But in terms of complexity, for sure, Syria is the biggest one at the moment.
Have you got the support from nation states that you want?
Yes, in terms of humanitarian aid, they feel okay with their consciousness in supporting, but if we look at their serious commitment to fix the causes, to stop the suffering of the people, then I think that they are only thinking to clean their conscience in supporting the humanitarian organization. This to be very, very frank and direct on the answer, because there are huge responsibilities on the shoulders of the so-called superpowers that are playing an important role in this crisis.
Does it break your heart that there's a ceiling to what you can do? You can only go so far. You can't solve the root causes. That's a politician's job.
Yes, it's really frustrating. It's really frustrating. It's something that sometimes I try to fixing myself, finding time to spend time only with myself, alone, to think. Because when you are on the ground, when you talk with the people, when you are forced to confront the level of sufferance, the magnitude of sufferance with the people, with the stories of the people, because sometimes, and in this, let me tell you a sincere thank to your network, because what also we are experiencing sometimes is that those who are suffering in this context, like Syria, are sometimes dehumanized. Now we only talk about numbers, statistics. But behind numbers and behind statistics, we as humanitarian, we have the experience in meeting and in dealing with their own sufferances, the individual sufferances. So each human being that we meet on our roads as a story, as a family, as a legacy. And this is something that it's important also to tell. So your role is such important.
Is there ever an argument for organizations such as yours to become more political, where you say enough is enough? We can clearly identify who is the cause of the problem. So yes, we believe there's an emergency, people are suffering, people are dying. This is the culprit, and the international community needs to stop this culprit. Is there ever a case for that?
Yes, we did. For example, look at Yemen, where I think we were very vocal on this. Of course, we always have to maintain our neutrality. But what we are confronting in this modern era, it's what does it mean, neutrality, when you are confronting this magnitude of needs? And this is something that is also a serious question also for us. We are discussing how to be and to maintain our neutrality when you are confronting the suffering of each human being.
And when they accuse you of taking sides, so for example with Yemen, and you say if you blockade Hodeidah, if you bombard Hodeidah, you're pro-Houthi. What does that do? Does that make you measure your words differently next time?
No, there is to be instrumentalized is always very high when you are dealing with this kind of crisis, but it's always a matter of fact. Rule of war exists. It's not a creation of our fantasy. So, and we are moving on the basis of rule of war, which that means that civilians must be respected, health facilities must be respected, hospitals must be respected, ambulances must be respected. This is a matter of fact. Then, of course, everyone could instrumentalize everything, but again, we try to talk on the basis of what is happening on the ground. And this is the reason why when we say enough is enough or stop the bleeding, this for us as a mean, because we are experiencing on the ground the fact that an hospital has been bombed, as happened a few hours ago in Yemen, in the Médecins Sans Frontières facility. This is a matter of fact, again.
What is the future of humanitarianism? How does it need to change moving forward?
I think that we should start to work on prevention, because humanitarianism is not only about wars and conflict, but also about to deal with the consequences for the climate change, for example. So, and I think that create more resilience in the communities is something that even for the international communities to be something to invest. To prevent, and this could also create a lot of saving instead to deal with the consequences of natural disasters.
Can you give me an example of something over the past few years where the IFRC has given help, intervened in what you do, and you've seen it as a success story?
Oh. We have some a lot of little stories, so that I can tell you about just for me immediately the villages that we built in Haiti after the earthquake, what we have done in Nicaragua after the civil war that has happened. A lot of good experiences in Africa, but the magnitude of the needs is not enough. So this is, and then if we look also at the migration crisis, I think that we can also say and add that we can make an incredible list of good examples and good practices of integration. I think also in your country you have a good model of integration coming from the Turkey Kizilay, and is a center that provides skills and vocational training for the refugees. This is the key. Dignity is not only about food. Dignity is about vocational training and the ability to integrate and create acceptance in the community. And this is which is one of the crises that is affecting not only Europe but the entire world. I can list a lot of good examples of effective activities of the Red Cross, Red Crescent communities.
And my final question to politicians who want to instrumentalize what you do, who want to say, well, leave us to the politics. Sure, you guys can feed people if they're starving, or you can deal with refugees. Your message to them is what?
Well, that's when the humanitarian organizations are instrumentalized, you are really creating and adding other sufferances to the people. I can start with an example of what has happened at the beginning of the crisis in Syria. No, there was a big instrumentalization of the role of the humanitarian aiders, the role of those who were working on the front line to support those in need on both sides, and a lot of staff and volunteers were killed. We lost 70 people in Syria since the beginning of the war. That means that we are not able to reach those in need, and especially when this happens or comes from the politicians of the country that is affected by the crisis. That means that you are creating a strong damage to your own people. You have to respect our neutrality. You have to respect our role. We only want to take care of those in need. We don't want to be part of the discussion. Our message is a message that is born on a battlefield in 1859 in Solferino. Solferino has been one of the most terrible battles in the Second Independence War of Italy. And Ridiunan, our founder, found himself in the middle of that. And can you imagine at that time how high was the level of anger of the nationalism in that century? But then Ridiunan and the women of Solferino found that when a man or a woman is suffering, then is not anymore a soldier, is not anymore, it's a human being. So we have at our core only the human beings. We don't want to be side of any political discussion of any army. We only care about humanity.
Francesco Rocca, thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers.
Thank you.
That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, has Cameroon re-elected Africa's longest reigning leader? And will a win for President Paul Biya only exacerbate tensions between English and French-speaking communities? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.